All right, so this video we want to discuss how to make your Sade Sati period worse. A lot of us do this all the time, but in a sense what we're going to find is that this is really just going to show us how you make Saturn worse in your chart in the first place. So how do you make your Sade Sati period worse? The first thing you do to make your Sade Sati period worse is to try to disregard the fact that you might be in a difficult time period. When you're in a difficult time period, it does not help in any way, shape, or form to deny that you are in a difficult time period. Then you need to start to take stock of what is going on in your life. And it's good to have a journal during this time. And you need to start writing down what is happening to you and what is it that is causing you the most distress, and what kind of distress is it. You need to write these things down so you become very clear on what's going on, because the more you give in to the overwhelmed feeling that occurs during a Sade Sati period or a difficult Saturn transit, the less likely you're able to hear and learn and grow from what Saturn is trying to share with you. And we have to remember that Saturn is an aspect of our consciousness. He's an aspect of ourselves. He's no different than us. He's that part of us which needs to learn to deal with adversity. And so when Saturn influences our life, when things start to go wrong, it's because Saturn is trying to show you, point out to you, hey, you're not doing something right here. That's why Saturn is considered to be that taskmaster. Saturn is not going to whip your back if you're staying in line and going from point A to point B. It's when you start to falter or look to the side or go somewhere else where you're not getting to where you need to be going, where you're not paying attention to your duty clearly. That's when Saturn whips you, and that's where you yelp and you get more angry at Saturn than you do at just realizing you need to be angry at yourself and stay on the path that's been laid out for you. And sometimes that path is to move through difficulties. In fact, one of the things that you can learn from the chart, an astrologer can learn from the chart very easily and very quickly, is where are you meant to take greater responsibility? Saturn is a planet of responsibilities, and it's not the kind of responsibility where you're going to be given $1 million at the end. It's the kind of responsibility where you're paying off some kind of debt, where you have to learn and grow through a difficulty. So if you have Saturn in your second house, maybe in this lifetime, your focus is to be on being responsible with money, with family, with finances, with your resources. If you have Saturn in the first house, maybe your responsibility in this lifetime is to suffer through pains of the body. Just to realize that everyone has these things from time to time. But for you, it's going to be amplified because in the past, you have not given a whole lot of time and attention towards, in a sense, toughening up or manning up, as they might say. And you don't have to even use that term, man up. We don't have to be sexist here. Think about a mother. When a woman becomes a mother, or when a woman goes through an experience of birth like that, she has to, in a sense, become tougher to defend her child, to make sure that child can grow up, to make sure that the relationship with the child is healthy. So in a sense, a woman becomes a woman when she has to go through some kind of tough process, like her own rebirth, or birthing a child, or taking great responsibility for something else, because you are letting go of the focus on yourself and I. That's in a sense what happens. With Saturn, the difficulties with Saturn arise because there is this sense of I should be experiencing this. I shouldn't have to go through this. What Saturn does is it brings into your awareness there is suffering in the world. There is pain in the world. You know, for example, one of my good friends went through a very difficult time period. During that time period, I had no understanding of what he was going through. I could kind of imagine, but I had never gone through anything like that myself before. So I offered to do just these real basic things for him, thinking that was being helpful. A few years later, I had to go through an extremely difficult time period, again related to Saturn and the Sade Sati period. And it was almost, not quite, the exact same difficult thing my friend had to go through. And since my friend had gone through it, he understood what I needed. And so he was there every step of the way, offering things to me, just knew exactly what needed to be done, that needed to be said. And when I thought back over that experience, I realized what a jerk I had been, because I did hardly anything for him. So by me going through this Sade Sati period, by me going through a similar experience, my own compassion increased. I apologized to my friend for not doing more. I apologize to many people for not doing more for them. And now I know, because of that experience, how to be more helpful, more compassionate, more kind, forgetting about my own comfort for the sake of someone else. This is what Saturn does. This is what Saturn wants. This is why Saturn is the last planet in the solar system. It's about going beyond yourself. Going beyond yourself. And that's one of the reasons why the greatness of Saturn is so helpful. Again, I'll put a link down at the bottom of this video so that you can explore that. Because at the end of the greatness of Saturn, the thing that the main character learns is that he wishes that this suffering happens to no one else. That is his ultimate prayer. He doesn't say, don't let this happen to me again. He says, this was so great that I wish and I hope that this happens to no one else ever. And Saturn is so happy with that development that the character went through that he ends up returning everything to him that he lost. He ends up making this person even more vibrant and beautiful and renowned and whatever it might be. Elevates him. Saturn elevates him because he understood what it meant. And what the Sade Sati means, what it's all about, is teaching you the full scope of your humanity in a way. It teaches you how other people suffer by your own suffering. You realize that you are not separate from humanity, that when someone else suffers, that is an aspect of you suffering. When you suffer, that is an aspect of humanity suffering. So by learning this, what we see is that when you go into a Sade Sati period, or any kind of difficult Saturn period, difficult Saturn transit or dasha, if you are hurting, you need to first be very clear on what your experience is by journaling, by writing it out. Okay? And then you need to start asking yourself, what is this teaching me about my relationship to humanity? The human condition. What is this teaching me? And rather than complaining about it, you need to learn to pray in a way, if you can, if that's important to you, or meditate on how can I best understand this and how can I move through it, and what are the little things I can do right now to make this better? What are the little things I can do to cope with this? Not expecting to create a radical change within your life during the time period, but learning what little steps you can take to make it better. You know, if you're in a financial situation, things just bottom out, you lose all your money. Well, maybe the first thing you learn is, okay, I need to be on a budget. I need to get rid of my cable. You know, I need to lower my cell phone plan. Because you're taking more responsibility for your finances. At this point in time, you have less coming in, so you need to adjust for that. You don't want to, little Y says, but I want everything right now. I want to be able to have all of my things. But Saturn's coming in saying, well, you got to learn that there's more to life than things. Or let's say you go through a health issue, and let's say that this is classic. You get people who are, I want to do a video on this, by the way, on how your natural health lifestyle is probably ruining your life. I'll probably do that on my Kriya Yoga Online channel, youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online. But let's say you spend your entire life, you know, being a vegetarian, being a vegan, not drinking water with fluoride in it, you know, avoiding gluten, avoiding dairy, all these things that you've been told are, you know, the things that are going to make you healthier. And then all of a sudden you get this disease out of nowhere. You're like, what have I done? Saturn's coming along, and Saturn's teaching you, there are people in the world that don't have any food. And you've been making a big deal out of, you know, these little things. There are people in the world that don't have a safe environment. You know, these things start to come up to you, and you start to be forced back to basic survival. What is it that you really, truly need to be healthy? A warm home, fresh food that's not spoiled, not too much food, exercise, good sleep. These are all the basic things you need. Saturn doesn't care about fluoride in your water causing mind control, or the fact that GMOs are altering your DNA, or anything that you can get into that's just most people go nuts over, you know, or that you inhaled some exhaust fumes and so you need to take a naturopathic remedy to correct it, otherwise, you know, you're going to have a bad day, whatever it might be. Saturn really brings to light that your health requires very basic things, and you don't have to be a nut or a fanatic about it. And that can be extremely, extremely challenging to people, especially if you've been raised in a culture and environment where you think that a particular way of life is the only way of life, otherwise, you're going to fail. When it comes to relationships, maybe your relationships become challenged. Maybe some really difficult things come up for you in regards to relationships. And in a sense, it's forcing you to grow up. Maybe you're made to force the fact that you have a very childish understanding of relationships, that you want things all in a certain way, you want people to respond to you in a certain way, when really what you start to learn is relationships are about having unconditional love for someone else or compassion for someone else. It's about being respectful to someone else. It's not about, acting like a teenager. It's about, are you able to do your portion of the work? Are you able to contribute? And let them do the same, and respect and love them for that, to give more to the individual. Maybe the person requires more attention from you at that time when you go through a Sade Sati period that's influencing your relationships. So the worst thing you can do is complain. The second worst thing you can do is not listen and not try to grow up in the area that Saturn's calling you to grow up in. And you will find that if you can do that listening, if you can do that paying attention, your suffering will tend to turn into a source of fulfillment. Meaning, maybe you come to a point in your life where you had all these ideas about things you wanted to do, career you wanted to have, but now you have to take care, of a child that has a disability. Or maybe you find that something happens to your parent and you have to go back home and live with your parent and take care of your parent. And you're thinking, why did this have to be? And not everyone's going to be this way. Some people just naturally have this understanding of giving, but it's not necessarily as common as you think. And so you start treating whatever you have to be doing as service, joyful service to the divine, because whoever is in your sphere is a representation of this divine that needs your love and your compassion. And that takes some skill. Now it might take some meditation, some prayer, some requests for the ability to surrender. All these things are very important to develop during a Sade Sati or Saturn return time period, especially if there's difficulties involved in your life that seem out of your control. Because they will seem out of your control. And in a sense, they are things that cannot be helped. Meaning, they're things that you personally don't have any major control over. That you just have to learn to adapt and adjust and see where it takes you. And that's how you, in a way, regain control. But it's not control in the sense of you're forcing something to happen in accord with your own ideals. It's about learning to be changed, learning to be sculpted. When that stone statue is being chiseled away, they're coming in with a rock, the rock's getting hit with a hammer and a chisel. If the rock had feelings, it would hurt. But at the end, what do you get? You get a beautiful statue, assuming the sculptor is talented. So we need to keep this in mind that if you're trying to escape from whatever's going on during your Sade Sati period or Saturn return period, you're going to have a lot more problems. If you are aiming to find out what is the responsibility, how are you meant to grow through this, you pray for that, you reflect upon that. And it's going to be very subtle because your little ego is going to get in the way and it's going to rail against whatever's happening. But you need to pray, meditate on, if I wasn't worried about myself, what would I be doing right now to help this situation? And then respond daily. Try not necessarily to think long-term, bigger picture, because when you're in a difficult time period with Saturn, oftentimes there are so many obstacles that come up. I was driving around today, going to the pharmacy to get a notebook so I could write some things down. And I saw a little sign for children's martial arts class. It was like a ninja class or something like that. And said, creating powerful little ninjas one obstacle at a time. Right? And that's exactly, what happens when you go through a Saturn period. You are ideally, if you work with it, turning into something greater than what you were previously. You're being reinvented, you're being chiseled, you're being put into a crucible. And this happens one obstacle at a time. So you can't look at the whole obstacle course and become overwhelmed. You need to say, all right, today, how do I learn from this? How do I deal with this? How do I breathe through this? And then you learn from that. And then the next day, you can move on to something else, or it might take you some days or some weeks to hit each obstacle. But you eventually learn and grow from it. You realize that you do have the capacity to grow from these things. And that is also a very important point. Part of what the Sade Sati and Saturn return is all about, part of what it's all about is learning that you can deal with these things. You can grow from these things. So you want to believe it, but with Saturn, it's about developing inner optimism. I can do this. I have the strength. I have the fortitude. And even if you have to tell yourself that every day and mean it, you will start to find that yes, you can handle it. There may be days when you can't. One of the things that we learn in a Sade Sati period or a Saturn return period is to grieve, to let ourselves cry, to let ourselves feel overwhelmed, but not in the sense of being pulled into it, but in the sense of just expressing it as though it's normal. It's a natural, healthy thing to do. When you're in a difficult time period, you need to express what's going on for you, but not to define yourself by it. Someone posted a silly comment on, I forget which video it was, but I might have been talking about Saturn. I was talking about mourning and grief, and of course they come with the lofty ideal, why should you mourn? Why, when there is no death, blah, 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 all the silly, repressed yogic stuff that people get into. Sure, once you realize that, you don't need to mourn or grieve, but most of us aren't there. And even when you are there, it's okay for the body to express it. You can still know that there is no death. You can still know that, it's really the identification with grief which is the problem. But just like it's okay to play a mournful tune because it's beautiful, it's just as okay to express grief and to cry and let your heart release whatever's going on there during the Saturn time period. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or you're not being yogic. It's just that, like, you need to eat like everyone else. You need to express anger, you need love, all these things like everyone else. It's part of the human condition, and that's what we're part of. Remember, part of Saturn is learning to embrace your own humanity, which is the fact that grief is there. It's okay. You just don't want to get overwhelmed by it such that you can't move on. And when you're in a difficult time period, you may wake up in the morning, you might be overwhelmed. And so you cry for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, take a deep breath. You got that out, but now it's time to start doing the work to move through it. You just have a time period where you feel what you need to feel, but then after that, put those things away and just get to work. And then you can cry again later. But what you'll find is if you just put it in its place, by the time you get through the whole process, you will find that it was okay to grieve. You needed to express that energy. Otherwise, you just get more and more worn down by trying to lock it down, by not expressing it, by not letting it flow through you. You let it flow through, you do your work, you come back, you just keep going until you get through the whole process. So the other thing with a Sade Sati and Saturn return period is it's okay to grieve. It's okay to feel bad. It's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to pray about why is this happening, but don't let yourself dwell on it so that it consumes you. Use it as an outlet for expression, but then move on. So these are, in a sense, I suppose, ways that you would improve your Sade Sati period, but how you make it worse is by not looking at your responsibilities that are coming your way. You would make it worse by getting overwhelmed by the obstacles instead of just doing one little thing at a time. You would make it worse by avoiding your grief, by trying to stifle it down because some idealistic, misunderstood yogi who misunderstands says that you shouldn't be grieving, you should be tough. That's not going to lead you anywhere except to more repression and more Saturn stomping on your head until you realize that it's okay to cry or be frustrated, whatever it might be. So review this, consider this, and try to implement what you've learned here. And then our next little section will talk about real specific ways to help you get through Sade Sati and Saturn return time periods. All right, so be well, hang in there. There's absolutely nothing wrong with what's going on with you right now. It's just a part of life. We all go through it. How we deal with it is what is most important. How we deal with it is what's most important.